start to feel it. You start to question if it's real. Love came so natural back when things were easy, but now we can't stop the rain. So much time and effort was given, sacrifices throughout all the years, but I'm no longer the same girl you fell for way back then, and now we can't stop the rain. It's so lonely now, so lonely. Don't want the blame on you, but my inner voice is calling out, telling me it's time to go. It's saying we can't stop the rain. Go on and run away until you see the sun, baby. Go on and run away until you find the one, baby. I'll be the one rooting and cheering for you in the distance, 'cause you deserve someone exquisite. Yeah. So lonely, so sad. Don't want the blame on you. You can hold me now. Just hold me as we cry and sing the blues. But I can't stop. No, you can't stop. Baby, we can't stop the rain.
This week on Overproduced.
The best part about being a mixing engineer is that I get to work with all different types of musicians and producers. Today, everyone in the house is getting together for a good old-fashioned gift exchange. What could go wrong?
Set your compressor to an 8-to-1 ratio.
That's essentially just a limiter!
You don't need a compressor if you just play right.
What button do I press to do that?
If I know nothing of recordings, then why am I the one in possession of a recorder?
One house and 5 musicians and producers.
This house is like a good mix. You've got lows, you've got highs, and some frequencies need to be cut.
If you think you could press my buttons, think again. I press the buttons here.
I don't know what CDs are.
I can record in the woods with no electricity. Can you?
No one better go behind my bark, lest they want to have their legs broken.
But the only thing they're producing is drama. This is Overproduced. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you not want a reality TV parody about a house of music producers? This holiday, get what you really want at the 12 Days of UAD sale.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio. Welcome back to another Office Hours. I hope you guys had a great weekend. And we got a great show for you guys because we're back to teaching. We're back to doing some tutorials. We're gonna spend all day today talking about tips and tricks related to kick and bass, the low end area of the mix. Arguably the hardest area to really nail down because there's not a lot of room and it takes up a lot of energy. So we're gonna give you guys some ideas, some tricks that you can put into your bag to use on mixes and productions down the road. And luckily, I don't have to do it all myself. because I brought along my good friends Matt and Drew. How you guys doing today?
Good. How you doing, Ben? Hey, Matt.
Nice. Off the top, question for you guys, question for the chat. When it comes to low end mixing, what do you feel like is the number one thing people get wrong with dealing with their low end just in general?
Gosh.
I mean, probably getting it to translate on smaller speakers or just a wider range of speakers is probably the most common thing that I hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I would say similar to Matt there. I think a lot of people don't take the time to learn their environment well. So listening to a lot of reference music. Cross pollinating where they listen to music and where they make music. Right. If you cross pollinate those worlds, then you'll start to train your brain to know. I think we've all had that experience where you're working on a mix in the studio, you think it sounds awesome, and then you take it to the car and it's a muddy, bass heavy mess. And that's just because, and the irony is of course it sounded bad the whole time. You just didn't realize it in the studio. So I guess it's that. I guess it's kind of just like learning the room, learning the monitors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think ultimately a lot of these are going to kind of come down to the same sort of thing, right? The problem a lot of people walk away with is like it's either muddy or it's too thin. It's easy to get into extremes when it comes to the low end, and that's why we're going to dedicate a whole show to, because it is probably the hardest area to work on, but it's also the most fun. Like this is by far my favorite part. It's not because I'm a bass player. I'm not biased at all. But the low end is really where it's at. It's kind of the thing that I care about the most in a mix. So we got a lot of tricks, ideas to kind of share with you guys. But before we really dive in, since we're back onto a regular show, wanted to bring back some of our favorite comments from you guys from the community over the last couple of weeks. And obviously there's been a lot going on our YouTube channel. If you guys missed last week's show, you missed a great one, because we got to play all of the 12 days videos back to back, build custom bundles. It was a lot of fun. You guys in the chat were having a good time, as well as us here on air. But some of the comments have been great on the 12 days videos themselves. Dave was saying, love it. Bespoke comedy for audio nerds. Yeah, exactly what we were going for. We got, make sure, here we go. LOL, I can see this show on E.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Totally.
E or Bravo,
Yeah,
we'll take either one.
Yeah, we'll take either one. If anyone out there works at those networks, you're looking to option a new show, hit us up live at uaudio.com. We'll get you guys linked in.
Worst case Discovery plus streaming. Like that would be like the third tier, right?
Yeah,
at least that.
Yeah. I want Hulu. I want to get Paramount Plus.
Yeah.
Elron saying, are they lifting the dialogue for the script from the UAD Facebook group?
Yeah, a lot of it's familiar to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Cannot confirm nor deny that we definitely do look at the both the Facebook group, and also I sent a couple of Reddit threads over to the director writer as we were coming up with ideas for that one. So no, it is 100% based on real life, what people argue about in the real world. But another news in the last couple of weeks, we released 2 new plugins: the AMS DMX digital delay and pitch shifter, the 1580 legendary box, as well as the Manly preamp. Both of those are now available in 9.15 for UAD. And secrets out, you guys, if you add these to a custom bundle right now during the Black Friday sale, it's the best way to actually get an amazing deal on those 2 brand new plugins. But Guillermo said, very impressed. Having used the original one, he can confirm that this thing rocks. Thanks for the confirmation. It's always good when people, especially if you do know the original pieces of this. And I saw a quote from Jamie Liddell talking about on his podcast how much he loves the AMS DMX digital delay, and now it's incredible to be able to have it kind of at your fingertips. So you can afford more than one of them. Key point, you can have more than one in your rack, but also presets and I don't know if we made a big enough a deal about this, but the bottom row in the plugin, like that's this all the pitch shifting, the chorus, that was actually an expander box for the original unit.
A very rare one too.
Crazy rare. Like I went on Reverb trying to look at like how many of these have been on the market. Like 1 or 2 of them in the last year or two. Like they hardly ever come up. So they're incredibly rare to find. The fact that it's built into this version of it, like you're getting the full-fledged, almost unobtainium version of the AMS DMX. And the great part about launching that plugin was, as you guys remember, we had an office hour show where we brought on Chuck Zwicky, who helped design a bunch of the presets. He helped us make the sound examples for it. It was the only person in my mind that was appropriate to bring onto the show to like really educate me and you guys about what all the AMS DMX can do. And Bradley agreed. Chuck Zwicky is a perfect mix of left brain, right brain hemispheres, fully understanding that art is a science and that science is an art. He knows his tools inside and out, which is how he gets the most out of them and knows which should be respected and ignored. Yeah. Brad, I'm so glad that came through and that you guys got that same experience, because that was entirely why I knew that we had to have Chuck on board for that show and for that launch, because he's actually a genius when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and the presets he made for the DMX are so good. Like if you want to learn the DMX, just load up his presets and reverse engineer them, and you'll figure it out.
Exactly. Yep. And then the last comment that I pulled out is it's one of the most flattering comments. This is the greatest YouTube video ever, said Damon. on the support video for the Volt USB audio interface on how to connect it to an iOS device. I'm not going to argue with you, but I did want to bring this one on here because A, I thought it was funny, but B, you guys are probably starting to see more and more Volt content out in the world because people are starting to receive their Volts. I believe some folks in Europe are getting their hands on it. People in the US are getting their hands on them here very shortly. So if you're grabbing a Volt, make sure you guys do check out the videos. We've got a whole playlist of little snackable support videos, as well as once you get inside the UA Connect app and register your Volt, download all the software. There's also a whole Getting Started series with our boy Sanjay C, who walks you through how to get set up, how to start making music using the Volt and all the included tools. And yeah, we've actually got an office hour show coming up in 2 weeks where we'll be talking about we'll be deep diving in on the Volt. So as more and more people are starting to get their hands on it, we'll be able to kind of show you guys some tips and tricks around using the Volt and answer any questions, obviously, as well. So yeah, guys, I think with that, comments down, let's start diving into kick and bass mixing. This is gonna be a lot of fun. But as we kind of alluded to at the beginning of the show, this is something that some people really struggle with. And before we kind of start talking about tips and tricks here, I think we got to really talk about like why is it difficult? Why is the accuracy and reproduction so difficult here? And there's a bunch of reasons why. A lot of them have to do with your speakers, right? Your room that you're in, subwoofer, no subwoofer, headphones, no headphones. So if you guys had to give a tip for creating consistency and creating like a more accurate reproduction of low end, Drew, any advice that you'd give folks for being able to get something more accurate listening?
Well, I think that what I mentioned earlier, I can just kind of build upon, because I feel like it's really kind of is the key, is this idea of cross-pollinating. Now, there's a lot of people out there who they work in their studio and that's where they make music, and then they go in their car and that's where they listen to music. Mm-hmm. And those two worlds cannot just stay separate, right? Because, take a classic example, Michael Jackson Thriller. You listen to that on studio monitors and you'd probably be shocked at how little low end there is. Not little, but how tight and focused it is. And yet that record played on, at a wedding or on any sound system is bumping, like it's great. So it's like, I think that's a really tough lesson. That's a good lesson. Studio monitors are designed for efficiency, and they actually can output a lot more low end than maybe you ought to be doing. So I think there's a lot of people that are sort of lulled into thinking, wow, this is awesome. My speakers, I'm hearing all this bottom end. And then they go to their car, and consumer systems are generally, bass heavy and lack articulation. So I don't know. I think that I'm really convinced that cross-pollination is the way to go. To really you got to know what a hit record sounds like in your studio. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that.
And that's like nine problems out of 10 when it comes to this could be solved by really critically listening to records that you want to sit next to, and then just focusing. It's like, it's almost like the analogy is like if you're using your eyes, you want to really like focus in on an area of a painting and be like, what are they doing? What are the shadows like? Where are the highlight? You want to kind of analyze like the amount of content and contrast that's going on in there, and be like, cool, A/B it back and forth to your mix. Do I have that? Is mine the same? This is where level matching. There's a lot of techniques to this that are going to be important that we can talk about. But you're totally right. Like referencing, and the other huge one I want to put in there too is just the overall volume that you listen to affects your low end. This is probably as much as your room or your speaker. Like if you do know your room, say you know your speakers, you've used them for a few years, and you feel comfortable with them, you can still totally change your relationship in your ears. This is this has to do with the Fletcher-Munson curve. As you increase the volume, bass kind of drops, so you're gonna end up, if you guys look at the curve, and then here maybe I'll pull up a graph of it so you guys can see what I'm talking about.
That's a super important point. Yeah, we're not designed to feel low end as we are. So it's actually sort of an elusive thing. When Ben brings up this chart, you're going to see that the Fletcher-Munson, our low end response, our low end sensitivity drops off heavily, especially at low volumes. So at low volumes, we don't hear low end that well, and therefore, if you put too much in, right? Yeah. So if you look at that all the way on the left hand side, you can see that at low volumes, our sensitivity is very, we don't hear low end that good. So if you monitor too low, you'll make stuff bass heavy. And so, I mean, if you monitor too high, you have different kinds of problems with the top end, as you can, especially with the 3 to 5K range, up by that threshold of pain. So there's, and one of the things that, that goes along with this translation and the reference things is a moderate listening volume, so some people's, 85 dB SPL is what a lot of people recommend. Some people say that's a touch loud. So, I don't know, sometimes I'll just say 80 to 85 dB SPL is that sweet spot. It's where your hearing is at its most linear, right? So that's a great point, Ben.
Yeah, and one of the tricks I like to use a lot for this too, guys, is I have my comfortable level, the level that I could sit and work at for an hour or two, which is that 80 to 85 sort of range. But at the same time, I always check my mixes with the volume low. Because as you saw on that graph, it's now all of a sudden the bass is a lot less important. It's not coming out quite as much. But using tricks like saturation and some of the other mixing tricks we're going to show you guys can make the bass still be nice and apparent, even when the volume is super low. And likewise, I'll bump it for like a few minutes, right? I'll go like 90, 100 dB, like I'll rock out. Especially if the clients are in the room, like this is the most fun part is like, all right, hey guys, I'm gonna blast it here. Let's listen once through and like let's see what this feels like loud, because again, these are all the scenarios that your listeners are also going to experience, right? Like if it's playing at a live concert or in a club, it's going to be at 100 dB. Does it get out of control, or is it too tame when you're actually putting the SPL energy out there? And likewise, if people are listening to it softly in the background, can they still hear the kick and the bass information? So I'm a huge advocate for kind of listening in a comfortable spot, but also making sure that you're checking it out at lower and higher volumes as well. And got a question here. Ezra is asking, how do you find the best moderate listening volume? I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can do this, Ezra. Like nowadays, there's a lot of great apps for your phone that can give you a fairly decent. It's not. Don't trust it perfectly, but good enough for jazz. It'll give you a sense of where your dBs are at, and then just know that kind of the theory of it is anywhere between like 80, 85. People are going to argue all day long about which number you should follow. 80 to 85 dB in your listening position. It's important that you don't put it right next to the speaker, because obviously it's louder there than it is where your head is. So bring your phone here, measure the SPL. That's probably the most accurate and easiest way to get used to it. There's some cool things that you can do. If you guys are using an Apollo, there's a way to kind of calibrate your monitor controller in console to have a dB SPL reference level, and allow you to kind of tweak it up and down from there.
If you Google search that, you'll find that there's a KB article, and we even give you a test file, don't we, Matt? Isn't there? We even allow you to download like a pink noise file or white noise file to do that process. So check the manual and or Googling it, but we got that process set up for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a whole blog article that has that download and all the instructions you need.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great comment here from Best Coast is calling out Kendrick Lamar had different mix balances for the bass at live shows. Totally makes sense. Like that's them being super duper smart because like when it's loud coming out of a PA, it's completely different to what feels good on the radio or coming through car speakers.
I'm glad someone brought up Kendrick Lamar, because if you want a really good example of like modern mastery and mixing bass, check out any of the Kendrick Lamar records that Mix by Ali mixed, and that is just some crazy amount of low end that translates on pretty much anything and is still pretty tight. So
yeah, it's basically magic.
Yeah, if you make any kind of electronic, hip hop, anything R&B, anything in that, use a Kendrick Mix by Ali mix for your reference, and you'll be happily surprised.
Yeah. Best Coast is asking, so that works for monitoring through headphones too? No. So so far the SPL apps and being able to calibrate your Apollo's monitor output, those are all for speakers. For headphones, you're basically gonna kind of need to remember what 85 sounds like and try to emulate it and resist the urge to get louder as you start getting more stoked on your mix, which I definitely find myself doing all the time. Like the more I'm into it, the more I'm like, oh, I want to hear this, I want to hear that, I want to hear this, and it starts kind of creeping up into like the 90 dB range, and before long you're like, oh yeah, let me bring this right back down and see how it feels quiet again. So again, I'm a huge advocate for just kind of varying your volumes and making sure things feel good low, they feel good high, they feel good at a reasonable volume as well. And yeah, Drew, your advice, kind of walking out of the room, resetting.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, yeah, I think, one of the things that I recommend with my students all the time is like, is a for every hour you work, spend the first 10 minutes listening to reference music, and then work, like you said, Ben, at different levels across the next 40 minutes, and then take a 10-minute break, right? Those breaks are super duper important to clear your head. And then when you come back at the top of the hour, start out with more reference music, and that cycle, kind of will sort of train your brain to understand what hit records sound like, and eventually after hours and hours of doing this, and it'll take a while, this is not, don't expect to get good at this in a few weeks or a few months or maybe even a few years, it takes a long time. There's some really gifted people out there, and they make me sick because I'm not one of them. For me, it's working hard at it, and that little recipe I have found works great for people. I think a lot of people think, oh man, I've just got to keep going. I got to keep going. The other thing you can do is don't spend too much time with things soloed, like don't solo your kick for 40 minutes, like that just, man, you're going to lose the vibe there by doing that. You don't want to, I always tell people never solo anything for more than 30 seconds. It's like, solo it, work on it a little bit, and then get out and evaluate it in context. So.
Oh, that's such a great tip. Yeah, Drew, especially when it comes to like EQing things, right? Like if you hear something, like say you listen to the mix, you're like, man, that kick's got this like resonant thing that I don't like. I don't know where it is. You solo, you find the offending track, right? You find, oh, it's this track that is the thing I don't like. And then, pull up the EQ, we talked through a bunch of these tips, like using something like IsoPeak, right? Be able to isolate and find, oh, this is the frequency that's bugging me. Boom, right there it is. Turn it down, unsolo. Did it improve? Did it do what you wanted it to do? And then keep moving, because like you don't want to spend a half hour trying to EQ a kick. If you're spending a half hour just EQing the kick, you've tunnel visioned. You've probably gone in and you're really proud of yourself for doing surgery, and like you filtered all these things. You feel like you contoured it perfectly. You A/B'd it with some commercial kick, and then you play back in the mix. So you're like, oh yeah, that. I don't feel my kick anymore. What happened? And you bypass the
worse
EQ.
than when you started.
Right? Yeah, you bypass the thing you spent a half hour on, and you're like, wait, it was better before. Crap. Starting all over again. This is you can get. I remember this when I was starting out mixing. Like I would get very defeated sometimes, being just not getting the low end to feel like all my favorite records. And so much of this, especially when it comes to learning your speakers in your room. There's no replacement for time. Like it's time and practice, guys. Like we'll say this again and again. Like we're gonna show you. We're gonna focus in on some tricks and some plugins and some stuff that you guys can apply and use as little shortcuts. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like You got to have material to work on. You got to find sessions and then challenge yourself to try techniques, but always make sure they're in service of making it sound better. Because it's that experience that just like it snowballs and it kind of builds upon previous experiences to get better and better mixes and more consistency with your mixes, which I think end of the day, it's what we all like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you need, really expensive monitors or really nice monitoring chain to get good mixes. But I think a much better substitute for spending money on your monitoring chain is just time. You can get used to any speakers, you can get used to any room, and you can learn to mix great records in it. So,
yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Nice.
Yep.
Great. Well, so now that we've kind of talked about what all the issues are, let's start talking solutions, guys. I don't want to. I know we labeled this episode as like low end therapy, so we could just sit here and talk like it's a therapy session the whole time.
Commiserate.
Yeah, exactly. But let's get in here and kind of talk about some things that you can do to help with your kick and bass mixes. And of course, number one on the list is going to be saturation distortion. We did a whole, and this is all to say that we did a whole episode like a month ago or so now. That we'll drop a link here in the chat for you guys to check out. Check out that episode. We deep dove on saturation distortion, and that is probably the number one trick that you can use across the board for low end content. It helps add harmonics. It helps make it jump out of the speakers. It can add more energy to it without needing to add more actual low end energy. So. If you haven't watched it, bookmark it, add it to your watch later list. Make sure you check out the saturation episode.
And just to be clear, yeah, we're not talking about full on, like when we say saturation, remember that can be very mild, like that can be, we're talking about the subtle saturation and the subtleness of transformers and capacitors and all that stuff. So don't be thinking that we're just talking about like, full on audible distortion. And we talk, we go through that of course in that episode. So just wanted to clear that up that, make
nice. Sure So now let's talk, besides saturation distortion tricks, let's talk about some of the other ones that we can really do. And I think one of the hard things that a lot of people struggle with kick and bass is the kind of stepping on each other's toes is the best way to think about this, right? It's like, man, it feels like my kick and the bass, like they're both 80 hertz is just too crowded. They're both trying to be in the same spot. So Drew, what would be your trick for folks trying to navigate a kick and a bass that kind of want to occupy the same frequency range?
Yeah, so one of the things I like to do, a good visualization tool that helps is to, if you think about, when you look at your speaker, you've got the tweeter up high and you've got the woofer down low. You can if you think of your speaker and your sound stage and the frequency range is like a chest of drawers, like where you up at the the top drawer is the high end, the air, and the top end, and then of course the bottom drawer is of course your subby stuff and all that. And when you kind of think about your mix in that way, that up and down kind of method, one of the first decisions you can make or that you can think about, and I've got a little demo here set up for this, is when specifically with kick and with bass, is figure out who's going to be on top, who's going to be on the bottom, and so for example in this case I've got a simple track here. Let me just solo the drums up, and you'll hear, and I'll show you the drum, the kick EQ. Well, actually, I'm just doing a little bit of a high pass, which is actually another sort of little tidbit here is, don't be afraid to high pass kick drums. In this case, this was a pretty deep kick, and so I just high passed it at 30. But it's a deep kick. It fills the bottom of the speaker. So let me just play that for you real quick. Right, so we got just some drums playing a simple beat here, and then I've got this bass that goes along with it. And what I've got here is I want to just show you two quick approaches. So approach number one is I'm going to let the full range aspect of the bass shine through. I am doing I do have the distortion 2 circuit here up on the distressor. Don't be freaked out by this high pass filter here, because this is only in the detection circuit. So in other words, your audio is not passing through that filter. That filter is only for what the compressor is going to do. Mm-hmm. So approach number one is, and I'll just play it in context so that you hear it, because I've got guitars in here as well. So approach number one is let all of the deep bottom end of this bass come through, and it's either going to highlight going to gel with and highlight the deep kick, or it's going to be too much. Let's just give a quick listen to that. So if I mute my guitars, right? So that's approach number one. Let me contrast that with something else, right? And in this one, what I've done here with this EQ is, this might seem kind of radical, but look at what I'm going to do here. I'm high passing.
Plus 5 at 150.
Yeah. So not only I'm high passing at 80. Plus 5 at 150, and then I'm also putting in some 1K. So, and then followed with a different kind of compressor, because it's obviously just changing everything. So now, let's listen to what this sounds like. And what I want you to listen for is, and maybe I'll play them back to back again in a minute, but I want you to listen for the fact that the bass lifted up in the speakers, right? It came up above the kick drum, whereas my first example, the bass was down with the kick drum. So let's hear that. And back to example number one. So you can hear, so you like with the distressor, I'm letting all that deep bass come through. And you know what? Here's the thing: there's no right answer.
Both were good.
There is no right answer.
I'd love to hear from the chat what you guys prefer. Did you guys prefer the distressor with the low going on, or did you guys like that curve bender 176 a little bit higher up? And this is essentially what you're doing, right, Drew? Is you're kind of either focusing on the more subsonic, the like under 100 area, or going for that more like thick low mid area in that 150. It's two different ways to do it. They like in my headphones, man, they both sound really cool. Like I could see both working really well. It's just one's a little more scooped feeling as a whole mix, and the other is a little bit more full.
Yeah, and you know the reality is that this song is interesting because it has this part comes again in the second verse, and it's more of a moving bass line. So I'll play you that one. And then we'll play the higher one. You know, I mean, again, you know, for this song, maybe I'd even automate that so that like it's like that in the verses, then it goes deep in the choruses. Who knows? You know, the cool thing is to just think about, do some, you know, it's some of this is not super intuitive. Like you wouldn't think you'd high pass a bass guitar to 80 hertz. You know,
no, absolutely,
but it works. You know.
By the way, the chat, they're slightly split. It looks like we're leaning towards curve bender. We got curve bender, curve bender, distressor, curve bender, distressor, curve bender. So I'd say it's like
I'm torn myself. Myself.
No, and you're especially right. Like when it gets to that verse part where he's playing up the fretboard, he's playing up higher. It actually sounded fuller with the curve bender. Like it didn't disappear quite as much, and it kind of still popped through the mix in a really nice way.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah, curve bender again, curve bender. Curve bender's kind of winning on this one. So this
interesting.
This is an interesting snare, and you guys may notice like this is not a carving. You know, Drew's not in there kind of like trying to notch frequencies, and you know, I saw a few people in the comments already kind of call out this technique of, you know, and I've seen some people do this, and it does work successfully in certain occasions where they will add a peak to the bass and then go into the kick and pull out the same frequency. But here, Drew, all you had to do was just you left the kick alone. The kick EQ didn't change at all. We're just messing with the bass EQ.
And the kick is just how I tracked it. I mean, that's just what I got when that's just what the mic got. There was actually an outside kick mic, but I was getting so much bottom end out of this, even this inside kick mic, that I didn't. I turned it off. You know, I just turned off the outside kick. Yeah, I just turned it off. So.
Well, it's it is the carving around each other thing. It can kind of work, but you know, ultimately one of the best tricks that we're not gonna be able to show here is like its arrangement. It's about like the tuning of the instruments, the key of the song, the parts that the musicians play. Like if those are working good together as is, then you know, when it comes time to mix it, you have to do less of this like carving around each other and a little bit more about the just like general overall like fullness or thickness and or
well,
like
yeah, I was just
subsonic.
And I was just about to say, like, don't carve just because you think you're supposed to. Carve because it needs it. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of the things that's dangerous here is like you don't want to just do techniques because you think you're supposed to. Like in my case, the kick is fine as it is. Like it didn't need that carve. So in other words, just like, you know, try and trust your ears and try and trust your instincts on that, and don't do it just because, oh, well, I'm boosting it in the bass, I have to cut it in the kick. Maybe not, maybe not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that curve bender one is it's definitely looks like it's a bit of a fan favorite. And Witchap just called out a great comment here is the curve bender is going to help that bass translate on earbuds, and they're 100% right? Because having that high pass up to 80, it's less about that subsonic, the stuff that you would need full range speakers to hear, and it's a little bit more in that low mid, which is like that's where earbuds start kind of tapering off. Is in that like 200 down to 100, and then they start really losing stuff after 100 on the way to the bottom. So yeah, having a little bit more of a thickness in that low mid area would definitely translate more across small speakers.
Yeah, and keep in mind you have that option with the distressor right here. You know, in the the high pass filter here in the audio circuit, this actually will impact what you're hearing, unlike this one, which is just in the detector circuit. So you do have you have that option even with the distressor. I just figured I would build two different chains, to show the two different approaches.
I love that. So that's kind of frequency separation, but now there's another super popular technique that a little bit more. It's like a time separation in a way, and that is to sidechain a kick and bass, right? And kind of make them, hey, if one's working, the other's taking a break, vice versa. So Matt, do you want to walk us through how you would set up a sidechain example?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think the order we did this is great because the way I think about it is usually, you separate things in the frequency domain using what Drew just showed, and then kind of as a secondary step, separate things in the time domain using compression and sidechaining. So the way I have this set up is like the classic EDM kick and bass example where I have the kick sidechain to a compressor on the bass drum. So every time the kick hits sidechain to a compressor on the bass bus where the basses are coming in. So every time the kick hits, the bass drops in volume. Mm-hmm. So the way I have that set up in Luna, I just have the sidechain input set to the kick on my bass bus, and then on the API 2500, I have the sidechain set to the kick. So basically, instead of the threshold in the API 2500 acting on what's coming through the bass bus, now the threshold is acting on the sidechain, which is the kick in this case. So let me solo these up so you can hear what's going on. So this is I'll turn off the bus compressor so you can kind of hear the kick and the bass. I did some EQing where the kick is below, the bass is a little bit higher, but they're still kind of fighting each other. And especially with a dance music track where I'm going to slam this into a limiter later and try to get it really, really loud. Any kind of headroom that I can gain by getting the kick and the bass out of each other's way is really going to help. So here's what it sounds like with no compression going on, and you can hear they're kind of fighting with each other. So yeah, it's happening really, really in the low end too. Depending on what speakers you're listening on, you might not hear the full brunt of it. But yeah, every time the kick kind of sounds masked by the bass. The bass is kind of on top of the kick, and the kick's underneath it. So I'm going to enable the compressor that I have going here, and you'll notice every time the kick drum hits, the bass gets compressed, and it just kind of pops the kick out, brings it to the forefront a little bit more, and you can really hear the top end of the kick a lot more because it's able to poke through. It's not getting covered up by that bass. There's off again. Notice the kick gets a little bit softer, gets pushed back a little bit, and that's with.
Ooh, I love it. The way you describe it is perfect, right? It helped the kick. It gave the kick a moment to speak. It adds a little more edge to it, a little bit more body in the kick, but then you're still getting the fullness of the sub kind of just like woofing underneath that.
Yeah, and those frequencies where the kick and the sub are crossing over, now they're not building up as high. They're not going to be eating up headroom when I get to mastering. That kick is basically ducking to make space for the bass is ducking to make space for the kick. And then when you get into the full mix, it becomes even more apparent because there's so much going on. Just that little bit of space that you made for the kick to pop out really becomes apparent. Let me unsolo these and play the full mix here. So this is with, and then here's without. And with. So it just gives the kick a little bit more space to pop through all the stuff that's going on in the mix. And especially in a house music track like this, the kick is like the driving force of the track. So I really want that to be heard no matter what's going on. So yeah, that's really the basics of it. You can get into a lot more with how you set up the compressor. I have it when I'm doing something like this. I usually want the bass to get out of the way of the kick as quick as possible. So I have the attack set as fast as possible, which in this case is 0.03 milliseconds. And the ratio, I want basically the kick the sub to get out of the way of the kick as much as possible. So I'm using a infinity to 1 ratio, which is the highest ratio this will go to. And then the release is really important for any kind of sidechain example. Basically, if you're trying to get that pumping classic sidechain effect, the release is the time of the subs, kind of swoops back up. In this case, I'm not doing anything too pumpy. I'm just kind of controlling the volume and getting the sub out of the way of the kick. So I have it set to a pretty quick release. If you want to get that classic, Daft Punk, sidechain pumping effect, you can use longer release settings, and that'll kind of get you there.
Nice. And I think the real key thing here, right, is like, we talked about this. We did a whole episode, I think, about sidechaining, where we really talked a lot about how important these settings are, specifically the attack and release, like getting the ratio, getting the threshold set. That's kind of like, that's the barrier to entry is right there. But then the real fine tuning and the feel of it can drastically change depending, especially on that release time. Like how quickly is the compressor allowed to recover from a kick to now let the bass back through, and this can make it much more apparent. It can make it much more transparent. It depends on the sound and the vibe that you're going for. Matt, just lots of compliments here from the chat of people really digging this one. This sort of example of, and there's a lot of examples too of. Sorry, this is a really tasty sidechain example. There's plenty of cases, right, where you can kind of go overboard on this effect and really, make it a super dramatic, crazy pumping effect. But I like this, and that this is just a like, hey, everyone, we're hanging out, we're pushing and driving here. We're not trying to like have this crazy EDM pumping sort of vibe.
Yeah, I think the examples that people usually see with any kind of EDM example in sidechaining is that super exaggerated pumping effect, which isn't always what you want. This is more like a utilitarian, just mixing effect. It's not really like a creative effect. I'm not using it that way. But yeah, definitely subtle sidechaining has its use in dance music too. You don't need to always go full bore with the pump.
Mm-hmm. And we got a good question here from Karen asking, is sidechaining more of an EDM thing, or would you do that in a rock song as well?
You can definitely do it in any style of music. And with a compressor, doing it this way with the API 2500, the 2500 has a tone to it. It's going to change the way that your bass sounds. So it's definitely kind of a tonal thing and a mixing thing, or a utilitarian level thing. Mm-hmm. But you can make it really transparent, especially with quick release settings, quick attack settings. You can get to the point where it's the level change on the bass or whatever you're sidechaining is only happening when that kick drum is hitting.
Yeah, and you don't. It's almost imperceptible. It's almost imperceptible at that time, and it becomes truly a utility mix thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you do really quick release settings, you don't even notice it until you solo up whatever you're sidechaining, and you hear, oh, okay, there's that gap where the kick is supposed to be.
It's just tighter.
Yeah.
It's just tighter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is kind of the big thing. When you think about like what I use this for a rock mix, like. There are instances where, and it's really, again, we're trying to give you guys a bunch of different strategies to approach congestion down here, right? So you got Drew's kind of way of kind of carving it with the EQ. You've got a sidechain method. Either one works for any genre. It kind of becomes more of like, what's the energy of the mix? How do I want it to respond? How do I want it to feel? Because you can get some similar results, even just pushing into a bus compressor that's reacting more to the kick than it is to the bass, essentially gives you that same sort of feeling, but it's also now kind of pushing down the other elements of your mix. So these are all variables that are under our control when you're mixing a song. Like it's up to you to decide which one is the right way to do it. Do I want to like take some bass away when the kick hits, or do I want to take a little bit of my entire mix away using a bus compressor, or do I want to sidechain instruments and leave the bass completely flat as is? Like, so many different ways to approach this sort of stuff, and it's really comes down to knowing all your available tricks, techniques, methods, and then picking and choosing the best one, or trying multiple different ones and seeing which one feels best for the song. So I've got an example here. I think a few people have kind of asked about this one already. which is like, how do you deal with multiple basses? Something that's very prevalent in dance music, pop music, is for producers to use not just one, but 2 basses or 3 basses or 4 basses. Like I've seen producers get crazy and like have 5 different basses, like a concentrated subwave in the middle, a kind of like a mid bass, and then like some, arpeggiated, like they'll go nuts and have lots of layers that are somewhere between a bass and a synth or a pad or an arpeggiator. And then they also have a full drum thing happening all at the same time. So I've got an example here of one of the tricks I like to use when I'm confronted with multiple bass happening at the same time that I think is really effective. And this is, I'll play it back for you guys as I have it, and then I'll show you the 3 different ways I've treated this. So in that, we've got our kick. We'll play that by itself. Punchy, big, full. We've got our main bass. So that's kind of like that. This is going to be the overall sub. This is kind of the thickness inside the patch. And then the one that really sets us off is this last bass track, which you'll hear I went a little bit nuts on. So very obvious sidechain effect, right? Yeah. But more importantly, it's thin, it's on the sides, it's a little toasty. Like this is probably my favorite trick if I'm gonna have multiple basses, is to kind of pick and choose or kind of filter them to serve a purpose.
So Ben, did that first one have the sort of sidechainy effect on it? I didn't notice. Mm-hmm. Like, it felt like it did with the kick. It did. Okay,
it did. Yep. This was like, hey, this is as close. This is kind of an EDM pop sort of thing. It should pump. It should have that little bit of movement that we all associate it with. So the main one, you can see I did very little to it. It was just the sidechain. That's kind of how the sound is. Maybe I added a little bit of Studer tape to it. But the one that I pushed out to the sides, let me show you guys how I did that. So first I toasted it and filtered it with the Moog. So adding a little bit of drive, pulling the filter down a little bit. But I'm not using the LFOs in this one this time around. Sometimes I'll come in here, I'll use this LFO to do my pumping effect. But then follow that up with a Studio D chorus. This is what's making it wide. So let me take this on and off so you can hear. So now that I've kind of driven it, I've pushed it out to the edge, and then I follow that up with the EQ, the high pass, and kind of remove some of that low end. So this way it works alongside the middle kind of thicker boy. And then that with the drums. This is one of my favorite ways to deal with congestion down there, is to give them a unique treatment, give them something that gets them out of the way, makes them, this kind of ends up blending in with some of the other synths and the guitars on the sides of the mix, as well as adding a little bit of extra dirt, a little bit, it helps it translate. As you guys heard, they're playing the same part, they might have even been the same source synth. But now that this is over here on the sides, when I'm listening to this on earbuds, there's no way you don't hear the bass when we get to that section of the song, because it's coming down the middle nice and thick. It's coming on the sides a little bit toastier and chorused out. So yeah, that's best. My go-to is the Moog. Yes, that Moog comes up all the time on my mixes. So those are kind of 3 different ways, 3 different ideas for bass and kicks that are kind of stepping on each other's toes, how to EQ them, how to sidechain them, how to just process and treat them, get them out of the way of each other. But another problem that we kind of talked about early on was, boominess and thinness of mixes. And of course, we talked a lot about your monitoring situation and how much that has an impact on it. But this is definitely a big thing to keep in mind, is like, stylistically, you got to do what's right for the genre. Like, I think I saw someone in the comments, talking about Prince's Purple Rain. Imagine if Purple Rain had like a ton of low end. It wouldn't be the same. It would be unrecognizable. Like, it's part of that time and that genre and that style was that amount of bass. Vice versa with like a Kendrick Lamar record, right? Like, a lot of it is defined, like the sound, the balance, the tonalness of it. How bass heavy is it? It ends up kind of defining how it feels inside of a genre, right, guys?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, bass is such a huge part of like, dance music and R&B and hip hop, and like what makes you instantly recognize that as that genre of music is a certain bass sound for sure.
So when dealing with boominess or thickness, this is something that's often it's helpful to get this right at the source, right? To kind of, or at least be thinking about it from the moment that you're pressing record, to be like, what are we going for, guys? Are we going for like a really thick hip hop record, or are we going for a more aggressive like punk or hardcore record? Like, these sorts of things kind of matter in how you mic up the instruments, what preamps you use, what sort of processing you do on the way in. But there's also some stuff that you can do after the fact that can really help you kind of tweak and or clean up just overall boominess and thinness. And Drew, do you mind kind of walking us through some of your tricks here for what we can do to get things a little more even down there?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that, it's first of all, for me, it starts with, some of the things. I'm going to kind of go back to what I started out with in the first segment, is just have it just a little discussion about the bottom end, right? I generally like to think, I think it's a good idea to start from the bottom up and mix from the bottom up. And, so the first, little word of advice is don't be afraid to high pass things, like even things that you think shouldn't be high passed or something. For example, my kick, I'm high passing at 30, that bass in the other example, we high passed all the way to 80. One thing people, might not be, especially if you're recording a lot of acoustic music, close miking, right? There's this thing called proximity effect. You might have heard of it, whereas the closer the mic gets to the source, there's an increase in bass response. This is a byproduct of directionality. So cardioid mics, hypercardioid, supercardioid mics, basically everything except mics that are in omni mode will, you get a lot of bass buildup, right? So it's not uncommon to be high passing everything, right? That's the first thing, is to understand that, is to just to recognize that, oh wow, I like the immediacy, I like the upfrontness of close miking, but there's this potential downside, which is this proximity effect. So I'm doing that, the opposite of that, of course, is, here's a snare drum EQ where, maybe whoever tracked it did a little too much high passing, or maybe the drum is just a little bit feeling thin. This is kind of a bit of an odd snare drum EQ, but, again, right. Like just trust your ears, 5.5 dB, it's 160. Like and I found this, using our sweep technique, using that ISO peak feature. So that's the first thing I would recommend, just talk about, is make sure you're, don't be afraid to high pass things.
Mm-hmm. Especially stuff that doesn't need to be down there, right? So like, I know some of your overheads in your rooms, you're using the Pultec filter. I'm assuming you're kind of using that to kind of carve out like things that sometimes have information down there that doesn't really need to be down there.
Yeah. So here again, overheads. If there's too much kick in the overheads, they can start to smear and sort of mess with the bottom end there. Especially these room mics in particular. On this particular song, I did my overheads and my rooms. I did the same filtering to both of them. Mm-hmm. This was tracked in my studio, and I use this. I have a hallway that I use as a reverb chamber, and I put PZM mics in that hallway, so it's like a live reverb chamber, and they can get some pretty serious bottom end there. And, we've talked about this before. We talked about it with some low end stuff, and I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later, is this idea of like stereo low end can be problematic. Yeah. In that too much low frequency information that has stereophonic information will cause your woofers to do, be less efficient. Let's just, for lack of a better, to keep it as a simple example right now. So anyway, getting rid of that bottom end out of my overheads and my rooms. And then, another, I know we're talking about low end here, but here's another surprising example. Yes, you can have too much top end, good condenser mics that are close to drum kits sometimes need to be rolled off. And I like these Pultec filters because they're just nice, smooth, gentle filters, and they're very musical. So you know, I've got 12K going out of a lot of those.
Well, it's interesting. We got a good question here in the chat, kind of asking about like what high pass frequencies should you be using for some of these things, and I think the answer is like it depends, but often like, you know, a great way to think about this is like the low mid area, which to me is like 200 and below, sometimes, you know, 250, whatever, like that sort of octave between 100 to 200. That's where things can start getting a little bit muddy. And a big thing to know about a lot of these high pass filters is, you see it on graphical ones, right? Is like the amount that it rolls off. It can be very gentle or it can be very steep. And a lot of these ones, like the Pultec that Drew has up, that's a nice gentle filter. So when you go with a more gentle high pass filter, guys, you can goose it up a little bit higher frequency range wise, because it's going to gently roll around that 150. It might actually roll a little past 150 in reality. But it's not like a brick wall, like nothing under 150 is coming through. It's just attenuating that 6 dB less every single octave as it gets down to 0. So you know, you got to play with the curve. You got to know what they're kind of doing. But end of the day, like my preferred method typically for this is to kind of like grab a high pass filter, go too far, and then bring it back until you feel like it's reasonable. And you know, you can do this in solo to really feel the effect. But then you want to hear it again in context, like, you know, solo you're kicking your bass again together. Turn your high pass filter on and off. Is this helping or is this hurting? Am I losing what I like,
the key.
or not?
Yeah, that's the key right there, what you just said, Ben. Like soloing the two things that you're worried about together, right? Because, you know, you could be soloing your bass and you'll hear the filter, but if you solo the bass with the kick and then you toggle the filter on and off on the bass, or vice versa, whatever one you happen to be attacking, and if you don't notice, then so be it. You know, like it's the same with guitars. You know, like I'm filtering guitars here up to 100 and down to 8K, you know, basically bookending them. And it, you know, the bottom end of the guitar doesn't matter. I don't need that much bottom end. And sometimes I'll solo the guitars and the bass, and the bass. And then the idea is, and then you can toggle your filters on your guitars on and off, and you realize, oh God, you know, I don't need that bottom end in there. It doesn't matter that I could come up to 150 potentially on these guitars because the bass is, you know, psychoacoustically or inside the listener's brain is filling in that bottom octave, you know.
Can we hear that sounds like actually, Drew? Like, let's hear it. I'd love to hear your filters on your guitar on and off with the bass like that.
Yeah, so let me just start by I can walk you through the guitars. Here's the guitars. And you know, I'm a big fan of Soothe, so I'm doing these doing these kind of light to just get rid of, you know, they're just kind of, you know, super subtle. Just grabbing those little resonances, whatever that little magic it's doing. I'm a big fan of that plugin. And then you know, I'm pulling out some mid range. So 1K, you know, 1K. Just using this. I really like this MEQ5 for cuts. You know, you'll notice also over here. This is something I like to do a lot, which is I want to level match. Because this is also a very broad filter right here. And when you do that much of a cut, if you then A/B it, you know, you'll have a level drop. So I like to compensate for that, so that when I'm turning it on and off, I'm actually getting an apples to apples comparison, level matched after the mid cut, because otherwise it's hard to tell what you're doing. The other thing I find with the MEQ is and this is true in general, but when you cut mids, it makes the highs and lows more apparent, right? So this is that's just the nature of EQing. You know, you remove one thing. It's like squeezing a balloon. You know, you remove mids, the highs and lows become more apparent. So I find that then I'm going to follow it with this bandpass, 100 and 8K, and then for good measure, you know, you can't go wrong with the fat. So I love the warmth circuit, which is I'll leave that up there a little bit longer. So yeah, I love the warmth circuit. You'll notice I have it on 7, and I have the transformer engaged. It's not even doing any compression. But the net result is, and I'll just play you. I can play you these guitars. You know, there's quite a transformation. I'm going to turn on selection grouping, and then I'm going to come up here and right click and do disable all. And so you can hear with selection grouping on and the two guitars selected, I can bypass all of the plugins on both guitars. So here's the guitars before. So a lot of bottom end that doesn't really need to be there. And then when I put everything on, as super tight and focused. And then the bass in it doing its job, and then all together. So yeah, it's kind of just building up signal chains.
Can we hear those guitars without the filtering, with the full mix as well?
Yeah, sure. So here, this will be ugly. So here's the whole chain turned off in context. So bass and guitar are trying to guitar doesn't have any presence, doesn't know what it wants to do, and so when we put it all on, now they're really locked in. Mm-hmm. Ironically, it's not that different, but it's got that finish and polish, and it's dialed in and it's locked in with it.
Dude, that's such a vivid example of as you guys heard, when the guitars are by themselves, there was so much 80 to 100. There was this, which is. The guitar player is going to love that, right? They're going to hear that. They're listening to their track. They're like, dude,
guitar players.
That sounds mean. This is rad. It's so thick and gooey. I love it. But then in context of the mix, you're like, now why did we even invite the bass player to the session? There's no room left for him. So just that simple example of kind of filtering, EQing, really kind of, you didn't go overboard. You didn't make it thin, right? Those guitars, they're thinner than they were to begin with, but they were overly thick. And this is the sort of stuff that you want to train your ear to kind of pick up on, and then be like, oh yeah, man, there's these guitars, there's a lot already happening down here in that 100 area. The guitars don't need to be there because the bass has got that rhythm, and I want to hear the kick. Now you know what you want to do, and then you have a reason to go in and start kind of high passing and filtering out where the guitars don't need to be.
Yeah. If you listen to that on speakers, I don't, I'm on headphones now, but I prepped all this on speakers, and on speakers, it's very apparent without those signal chains, and some of it's the filtering, some of it's the fatso. It's obviously it's a culmination of all of it, but without those chains, the guitars they drop into the bottom part of the woofer and get muddy with the bass, and then, but with those chains, those guitars sit upright. They come up into the mid range, and they leave that bottom end open for that kick drum and for the bass guitar. So if you're not listening on monitors, listen to that AB on monitors, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. That lift and openness, and then that makes the bottom end feel extended.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right, we're gonna keep on moving forward. We got 3 more tricks to show you guys for low end stuff that we'll kind of cruise through here, because these are super important, and they're things that a lot of us run into. And I think JJ just called this out here in the chat, talking about how gain staging is key. Brother, you were so right. Gain staging is probably one of the most important parts to getting this right. Before, and this might even be before you start kind of diving in with EQs, compression, sidechain, any of the other tricks. It is to get especially if you're starting out your mix, getting it into a good spot right from the jump. So a trick that I like to do for this is I'll solo up. In this case, we'll go back to just a drums and bass solo, and then I'll come over to my main fader. And in this case, I'm using the Neve summing. This orange track here. This is my main fader, and you can see I've had to compensate. I probably started correct, and then I got excited and started pushing stuff up a little bit. So I've gone in and I've retrimmed it. But the reason why I like doing this with this API or the Neve summing built into Luna is this thing right above the knobs, the VU meter. So we've talked about this a few times before in the show, but if you're not familiar, VU meters they're different than the meters you're going to see down by the faders. The meters by the faders, those are peak meters. The goal of those meters is to respond as fast as possible to whatever level is present on the track, and those are going to be digital meters that are they give you a great idea of where the peak of all your waveforms are at, but they don't do a great job of really translating to how we hear, which is more of what we call a parent level, right? What does it actually feel like to the listener? What sort of level is that at? A VU meter, they respond a little bit slower. They don't respond perfectly even. And then you'll notice they kind of give you a really good sense of like, hey, like around 0 feels good. Like this is kind of where all my stuff is calibrated to sound its best, is around this 0 VU, which, you know, if this translated down to the peak meter down below, if you were to send a constant tone, that 0 is basically minus 18. Like that's how big of a difference there is between when you hit 0 on a VU meter and where it lives on a peak meter down by our faders. So this is a great tool to make sure that you're not pushing everything into your main faders at too high of a level. You can kind of check out on here where it's bouncing around. And then the trim knob, this is your kind of, you know, there's multiple ways you could adjust this. I could go back to the tracks on the left side, start pulling the faders down until they're about in the right spot, or I can just trim it out a little bit here, which is what I've done. So let me reset this to 0 so you can see how much I missed by, and then I'll pull it back and you'll see what kind of proper gain staging looks like for these two. So as you saw, I was all in the red the whole time. Not to say that that's like unacceptable. I've done plenty of mixes where like that was actually the vibe, and that was what I wanted, right? I wanted to push this stuff over its edge. I wanted it to be in the red as often as possible because that was the sound. For something like this, if I want it to be more dynamic, I want to see the meter move. I want to give it a chance to not be at +3 the whole time. So as I brought it down, you saw it now the meter's dancing, it's moving around, and this is this is a much easier way to kind of gauge where you're at level wise. And the nice part is like once you've now nailed the gain stage up here on your input of your bus, now it's fixed my gain staging into the ATR tape, which is now going to be bouncing around the 0 mark as well. So you can see when the kick hits, it goes a little bit red. Perfect. I'm pushing right into the sweet spot that I want to be at. But the average level is around 0, a little bit below 0. Awesome. And again, the carry-on effects of this are great, guys, because then I'm coming into my bus compressor, and it should be just dancing around just a little bit. There we go. I'm just barely kissing my SSL bus compressor. And then I've overall just given myself a great and a consistent gain stage. Like for me, this is a huge thing around mixing with the similar tools constantly, is like, I know if my SSL is just, you know, cutting a little bit here or there, like that combined with my final limiters and what I'm going to deliver for mastering, I'm going to have a nice consistent level. And, you know, if I'm doing this, especially focusing on the kick and the bass, the reason why you would want to start here is that those two elements have the most amount of energy. It's kind of a hard thing to just explain in words, but essentially the amount of energy that's needed to reproduce low frequencies is much more than what you need to reproduce guitars or vocals, which are at a higher frequency range. And this has, you know, those Fletcher-Munson curves we were looking at earlier has a lot to do with that, of like low end requires more energy to excite our ears than higher frequencies do.
If you were to analyze a piece of music that had that everyone would agree has a beautiful blend of lows, mids, and highs, the actual frequency response is like there's, you know, the low end is up here and then it just tops off from there. So it would not be linear at all. You know, it's it's kind of the opposite curve of Fletcher-Munson. You know, it's like we need to make music that's the opposite of what we're physiologically designed to accept. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm, totally.
There's some science behind it, Matt.
There is.
Ben, right?
There is. This is proven by science.
Yeah.
I saw a good comment in here saying, you know, it's better to do this sort of gain staging up by the track. I tend to agree with you. Yeah, if this wasn't already a finished mix that I'm now pulling up to show, where I've obviously corrected myself, I like to start with everything close to 0, right? Like keeping my faders at 0, keeping my trims at 0, and then adjusting the faders to get to the balance where I like it. But of course, inevitably, as I've added more energy, or like, I'll push the bass up just a dB here. Oh, now I want some more percussion. Like things start kind of creeping up, and this is nothing to be ashamed of by having your faders slightly creep up and get more energy to your mix. But then you just want to go back and reevaluate. Oh, maybe I need to trim down a little bit somewhere else in my signal chain.
And on the acoustic side of things, if you're working with musicians and microphones, primarily acoustic stuff, it all happens at the tracking, right? Most people track too hot. Most people, they just track too hot. They think that that meter is there to be filled, right? And when the meter, you don't want to. The meter's not there to be filled. If you just stick with half to 2/3 of the way up and leave that headroom for mixing. Generally, most gain staging things hopefully take care of themselves once you get a feel for where to track things. So
yeah. And now another issue. Again, I saw someone comment on this a little bit earlier, talking about stereo and mono. Bass loves to be mono, right, guys? Like, and even like our ears, we have trouble hearing directionality to bass. You could put it all in the way in the right speaker, but if it's 60 hertz, your head's not really necessarily going to know what speaker that 60 hertz is coming out of. But I guess when it comes to mixing, and this is especially a big important thing if you're going to vinyl, if you're going to a physical medium, if you have too much bass in one channel and not the other, or if they're out of phase from each other, it can actually cause real problems with the stylus on a record. So for that fact, monoing the bass can be a super powerful and very important tip. And Matt, you want to show us some tricks around ensuring that you have a very mono compatible bass?
Yeah, absolutely. Luckily, there's a very easy way to do it thanks to the Brainworks BX Digital plugin. But yeah, phase is super important with bass because bass waves are so large. There's if they're even offset from each other in a little bit, you get all kinds of phase cancellation. It doesn't come back around and sync up with each other like the high frequencies do. So yeah, all your bass frequencies you pretty much want to be mono. For me, everything from 80 to 120 and below, I usually make mono, just so there's no kind of phasey weirdness. But yeah, my favorite way to do that is the Brainworks BX Digital plugin. You got to use the full version, not the mix version, because it has the stereo with features in here. So yeah, I basically have this pulled up on my bass bus, which I have a few different basses, similar to the different stacked basses that Ben was showing. I have a sub bass, I have a kind of a mid distorted bass, then I have some bass fills that are also kind of in the mid range. So I'm feeding all those into my bass bus, and I have the BX Digital loaded on here. And what I'm using the mono maker for, since I have these different combined basses, some of them are sub basses, kind of 100 hertz and below. Some of them are more mid basses that are more up in the mid range and high passed. I'm basically using this mono maker to be able to selectively set all my frequencies below a certain point to mono, but still keep everything above a certain point stereo. So I'm not completely squashing everything in my bass bus down to mono. So let me turn this off real quick. Basically what this does is it's a simple one knob. You sweep it up or down, and whatever frequency it's at, everything below that is made mono, just summed to mono. Everything above that isn't touched at all. So it's very easy to use. Let me start with this. Let me start with this turned up all the way. So this is my whole bass bus, just in mono. You notice everything is right down the center. But kind of when I was writing the song, the role that I wanted these mid basses to play, this distorted bass and this bass fill, I wanted them to be kind of wider for a little bit of ear candy to the bass line. So what I'm going to do with this is sweep this down, and you'll notice those kind of more mid-range, high-pitched growls. They're starting right in the center. As I sweep it down and I get below where they're at, you'll notice they pop out in the stereo. Let me play that. Yeah, now my sub's still right in the center, but those kind of mid basses, they're still have a little bit of stereo width that I created with some plugins here, the DMX and the Studio D. So yeah, it's a really cool way to, if you have one sound that has some stereo elements to it, has some top end to it, but still has some bass to it, it's basically a way to separate those two frequency ranges into mono and stereo, all with a single plugin, and it's just super easy. You just sweep the knob up until what you want to be mono is mono, and then it kind of takes care of the rest. So yeah, it's that easy.
Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say. I was just gonna say. The funny thing is, for those of you who are gonna try this today, put this on your master fader, right? And the interesting thing about this is you're likely going to turn this up to 120, 150, maybe even 200 hertz. And guess what? You're probably not really even going to notice, and that's the whole point, right? But your speakers will notice the power amps, the efficiency of the low end, the tightness and the focus of the low end will be subtly improved. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that like this is not going to be some like monumental thing you're going to be blown away by. It's actually like it's sort of a utility thing where it's like a sort of behind the scenes, subtle thing. So I just wanted to throw it out there. Sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Matt, can we hear what it sounds like if you take the mono maker out of this? Like, how stereo is that low end?
Yeah, it's already pretty mono. Like Ben was saying, or like Drew was saying. But yeah, here's what the mono maker turned off, and then on. So it does focus things up a little bit.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to show that you can really like separate your mono and stereo sources on a single track, using this feature.
Well, and I'd love
if you really want to,
as you were pulling it down, like you just start getting like the little tickles of high end coming through now fully stereo, right? And like even if you do use like an extreme setting, leaving up like 1K, where like all the mid and kind of all the kind of main information for the bass could be all centered, and then all the sizzle is what's left to the sides.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like I'll do a better A/B. So here's everything mono. Hear that sweep is right in the middle, and then here's where I end up with it, and you'll hear that sweeps a little bit more on the sides.
Yeah, super rad. And that's one of those plugins that I think for a lot of it lives on my mix bus, and just like Drew mentioned, like I keep that mono maker at like 80, 100, something like that.
Yeah.
It just it kind of focuses everything that's going on down there, and sometimes stuff that's coming back from reverbs or coming back, there could be content that you don't know is there, that just by bringing it into the middle just makes everything feel more focused.
Yep.
Nice. And you can definitely hear that in the people are saying they can definitely hear that, especially on headphones. Magnus is asking though, he uses the BX saturator for monoing the bass frequencies. I think that it's basically the same function, right? It has the mono maker knob on it. There's multiple Brainworks plugins that have that.
Yeah, they've added.
Functionality.
Yeah, they've added it.
Yep.
Nice. Great. So now we're on to our last tip. Arguably one of the most difficult ones, which is dealing with phase when it comes to bass, right? Like, because these waveforms, because their frequencies are so low, in reality, the waves for these, for low-end information can be huge. They can take forever. And if they're slightly offset, you can start getting weird phase cancellations. This is most prevalent. A great example, right, is if you have a kick-in mic and a kick-out mic. If they're not equidistant from the heads, all of a sudden the phase on the outside mic could be just a little bit behind, a little bit out of the same wave period that the inside mic is on. And it can start robbing you of low end. And you also run into this with like overheads or snare drum microphones, right? Where all of a sudden, if they're not perfectly in phase, the low end, it can be there. It can kind of disappear. It can get strange. It can get not how you imagined it sounding. And you listen to one track and slowly you're like, yeah, my kick in sounds great. Yeah, my kick out, that sounds great. Two of them together, what happened? Where'd my bass go? What happened to the fun of the kick? And that means you have a phase issue if that's the scenario that you run into. And there's actually an incredible tool on the UAD platform for dealing with this, the Little Labs IBP. And I think, Drew, do you got a little example for us to see the IBP in action and how we can use it to get phase rocking?
Yeah. So I did this. I've been using this the whole time because it's part of this bass thing. So this bass recording that I did was, I did a DI and then I did a 421 and then a Royer, a Royer 121. And to your point, Ben, when you zoom in on the waveforms, you can see that in this case, the DI is a little ahead of everything else, which is to be expected, right? Obviously, DIs are electrical connections. They're going to get there faster than a mic signal that has to go through the amp and jump across the air and all that jazz. So we're only talking a tiny little bit of an adjustment here, and sometimes it's not, we're not talking about the polarity switch or the phase switch on your mic preamp, which does a complete 180, right?
Yeah.
It's sometimes it's less than that, So in my case, and let me just solo up the bass. I'll just compare two of them, but to give you the idea. So what we're talking about here is the Little Labs IBP. I actually had this hardware, I had this hardware for like 20 years, and then the plugin came out and I was like, hey, I sold the hardware. Because it's so nice. The hardware was always something that the hardware, encouraged you to use it like while tracking, and that, it's obviously nice to be able to adjust it after the fact. But at any rate, I put it on the DI, and what it allows me to do is, you have a couple, there's a bunch of switches and there's two main knobs. One is a simple delay adjustment, as you can see, the milliseconds here. And then on the right-hand side is a variable phase. So, a phase switch, which is just 180 or nothing. This allows you to go all in between there. Hence the name in between phase. So it's a tool that actually allows you to do that. Now, if you're doing it for bass, you've got this switch here, this button here that allows you to center it on the low end or center it on the high end, because as you mentioned, Ben, low frequencies have very large wavelengths, and phase is frequency dependent. In other words, some frequencies will be in phase, some frequencies will be out of phase, and there's just no way around that. So this allows you to center the process. In this case, I'm working on bass, so of course I would do it there, but maybe on guitar or something, or acoustic guitar or something, maybe I would switch it over to high. And then, of course, you have a phase reversal switch. And actually, in my case, I actually needed to phase reverse it plus some, right? So that's where this actually allows you to find that spot. So let me just give you an idea. Let me turn it off first and let you hear this bass DI against the 421. And then I'm going to turn it on.
Holy tone.
Yeah, it kind of brought it into focus, right? It's and by the way, there's not necessarily a wrong answer here. Brian May made a whole career, playing guitar and messing around with phase of microphones and stuff. So this is a creative thing. Like let me play this for you. It's like a dial. You can like dial in just the right amount, and some of it will be dependent upon where they're on the neck and the key of the song, and blah blah blah, all the the notes that are in there. But without it, you have kind of have that hollowy box, phase canceled sound, and then
low end.
Bringing it in locks that in, brings that low end back and all that. So that's a so your example is great. Kick in, kick out is a prime example for this. Bass DIs to bass mics, another example. Any multi-miking of guitars.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime you have mics that are at different distances, you sometimes you want that, but then you got to correct for the phase.
Well, and I love that you point out that this can be a creative thing, and it's not about getting it perfect. It's about getting the sound that you want, right? So you can rotate that phase to a point, and sometimes I use it to, we were talking earlier, right? When things are a little too thick, this is something that, phase and just inverting the phase might make it crazy thin. All right, no, I don't want that, but I also don't want it super duper thick. IBP lets you get halfway, a third of the way. It allows you to go to these in between phases that unlock different tones that you wouldn't normally get. So you can actually use phase cancellation as a benefit to kind of shape the sound without having to go in with the EQ. And it's super rad. Drew, I love that you pointed out that you can invert it. The cool thing about phase, guys, is this isn't like a 0 to infinity thing. This is going around a circle of phase. So you got 0 to 180, and then you also have 180 to 360. So what Drew's done by inverting it is he's working on the 180 to 360 area of the phase, where when he brings that knob back to full, he would be back to the normal phase that it started in.
Right.
So it's an incredibly powerful plugin, and I'll echo Drew here. This was literally the very first. This is the reason I got a UAD card back in the day. Like when this plugin came out, is when I bought a UAD. I think it was a UAD 1 card, because this was out on the old platform. literally just to get this tool because it was so important. It made such a huge difference on my mixes for kicks, basses, snare drums, rooms, overheads. And I've seen you guys in the chat. There's a lot of great tools these days that will actually kind of do some of this stuff automatically for you. And the reason why I always find myself coming back to IBP is because I end up approaching it with my ears and as a creative tool. The Sound Radic stuff, it's great because it kind of locks it in for you and just, whew, nice, I'm done. Everything's in phase and now I can move forward. The IBP, it kind of, you recognize a problem and then you bring it down there and then you kind of use your ears to be like, how much of this do I want? Oh, actually right here's super fat. Here's the kind of fatness that I want, which is like halfway between the two. So it's great to have those adjustments. And of course, we've been talking a lot about multi-mic and multiple instruments. But Matt, I think you've got an example that we can check out where this, even in sampled-based music, the same issue pops up often, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so like with any kind of dance music, hip hop, anything in that realm, it's super common to layer kicks. Usually, whether it be like an 808 layered with an actual kick drum or multiple kick drums together, one for body, one for click or smack. It's just super common to layer kick drums. But phase becomes an issue, especially if you're not just loading samples into your timeline and you can see the waveforms and manually aligning that way. If you're using MIDI, phase becomes super tricky and super important to keep a track of. So what I have going on here is I have a main kick drum, which is what you heard earlier, which sounds like this. So it's pretty low end. There's not a lot of a top end smack to it. Let's say I want to add another kick to this. So I have a MIDI program kick that's just programmed the same as this audio. With a simple 909 kick. So with no phase adjustment done, this is what it sounds like. Let me take it out. So it's adding some top end to it, but it kind of creates this hole in the bass region of the kick that's this phasey, boxy weirdness. So that's where Little Labs IBP comes in. And one thing that Drew didn't mention that I think is super cool, this phase adjust 90 and 180 switch. If you have this out, this phase adjust knob goes 0 to 90. So you actually have more resolution between each step. If you go to 180, it's 0 to 180, which gives you more range, but a little less resolution on the knob. So using that combined with the phase inverse button here, you can really get different combinations of range and resolution, which is really cool. But I have it set to 180 degrees right now, so it's just sweeping 0 to 180. I'll sweep through and you'll instantly hear what's going on as long as you aren't listening on too small a speaker since everything's happening pretty low down. But as I sweep it over, you'll notice things kind of seem to align a little bit more. They come into phase and you have more of a solid body instead of that kind of comb filtery weirdness that was happening at first. So here's what that sounds like. So yeah, by the time I get all the way to 180, it's much more in phase. For example, there's the where we started. Much more body.
Ooh, yeah, dude, it does go from this like. Neither side, I hope you guys are hearing this. Like, neither one's technically bad, but it's the fullness and the way they kind of work together feels better as you rotate it all the way through.
Yeah, and just like you were saying before, I mean, there's no right or wrong way. I mean, even though technically one's in phase and one's out of phase, you can use this as kind of an EQ or kind of a tone control. Whereas, if I have it swept all the way to 180 degrees, I'm getting more low end, but less of that top click. Or if I have it all the way to the left, it's taking away some low end, but I'm getting more of that click. So I can kind of put it somewhere in the middle where I get the best of both worlds, right? I get some more low end, but I still get the top end that second kick is adding. So yeah, it's really cool just to have the more tonal options of sweeping all in between the different steps instead of just like a 180 degrees flip that you would normally have on a mixer. Gives you a lot more tonal possibilities.
Oh man, I love it, and I love that this is where we landed for talking about kick and bass, because the IBP, if you guys hadn't heard of this one before today, it is probably hands down one of my most recommended UAD plugins that there is, because it is super powerful, very useful for multi-mic stuff, for sampled music. Anytime you start hearing, man, these things aren't quite interacting, the IBP throwing it on there and moving the phase around can be just as powerful as the EQ tricks that we showed at the beginning of the show, right, guys? Like, it can
even more fundamental. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of even more at the source, and even more and interacting in a way. And neither Matt nor I highlighted it too much, but there's also a straight delay in there, and the difference between the delay and the phase knob that we were dealing with is the phase knob is actually rotating the phase on the frequency range that you've selected, whereas the delay is delaying the entire frequency spectrum. So all frequencies are having their phase shifted, whereas with the knob, so that it literally is two different things. It's an alignment tool, but it's also that in between phase, sculpting tool. So there's a lot there.
Dude, and especially for the kick in, kick out scenario, or snare top, snare bottom, that's where the delay one really comes in handy, because if the mic was, say, off by 2, 3, 5 inches, you'll see it in the waveforms that there's a little difference in the peaks. And what the IBP can do is it can just slide that kick in back to match up the kick out without needing to do any phase rotating, just by putting it back into the same pocket. It's super powerful plugin. Highly recommend it. Saw a few people in the comments here asking like, hey, can we get a bundle with like all these plugins you guys have been selling us today, or talking about today? Absolutely, great time to ask that question, because custom bundles, guys. We can't say it enough. Like, custom bundles are the hands down best deal to be getting all these UAD plugins, and especially right now, because you get 3+1, which is normally we get a 3 bundle. They added an extra plugin to that, and if you haven't already seen, there's a coupon code. Maybe you already used your coupon. If you used it once, guess what? By our show last week, we unlocked being able to use it twice because you guys voted for it. There's 6 with 2 free plugins and 10 with 3 free plugins in it. So like you can get 13 UAD plugins, and I think like the end cost is like under $75 a plugin or something like that. Like, crazy. Well, and then you can stack your plugins. Then you can stack the coupons on top. So not only do you get the bundles, but then whatever the daily plugin is, if it corresponds and you put that plugin in your as a part of your bundle, you're getting even more. So, so guys, it's 12 days UAD. This is not the sale to sleep on, because it's the best deals of the year by far. If you saw anything today that you guys want to check out, there's always 14-day free trials going on inside of the plugins themselves, so you can try before you buy. But definitely, I believe the 12 days UAD, it's going to end on Black Friday, which is this Friday. So you got this week to decide what's going to go in your custom bundles, and get it before it's too late. But guys, and this has been such a show. It's too much to recap, but essentially, kick, bass, lots of fun, lots of different techniques and strategies for being able to make them both sound their best and make your mixes translate. There's a ton of stuff for you guys to kind of come back and re-reference here inside this episode. But to close it out, we haven't done this in a few weeks, but I really want to get back to it, because it's one of my favorite parts of the show, and it's where we need your guys' help at home. It's Studio Showdown. If you guys, if you want to participate, you can win a UA Live coffee mug, and so your studio looks even cooler than it did in these pictures. All you have to do is hashtag UA Office Hours on Instagram, and we'll find your pictures. I try to keep it even. I try to keep it competitive between the two different spaces. But today I decided to go. We're in the same realm, but one's very digital and one's very analog. So this is gonna be a tough one, I think, to judge. We got 2 super beautiful studios.
Oh man.
Yeah. So let's dive in. Let's start critiquing. Let's kind of figure out how we're gonna score these. So this is Jay Craft. Super clean desk.
Yeah.
I think he likes control surfaces. it's just a guess. I'm gonna guess, because
going out on a limb.
Yeah, going out on a limb here. You got the console 1 and the console 1 faders.
Well, and not only console 1 with the aftermarket knobs.
I know. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the aftermarket knobs. That's next level.
That is. Well, and it's got to be really nice to be able to look at the knobs and know what section you're in.
Yeah, I see people put SSL knobs on them. There's all sorts of little knob kits people have been done.
And speaking of SSL, the UF8 and the
UC1.
UC1.
Yeah, UC1.
Front and center. Amazing. We got, I believe, is that the Persona Central Station up here? Next to the Twin, Mac Mini. Satellite. Running
hub. I guess a hub, yeah.
Yep, running Luna up here.
It's got HS8s and HS5s.
Big speaker,
Must
small
really
speaker,
like this
right?
Yamaha. Yeah.
Yamaha fan.
You got the little comfort here. This was the unknown to me. I think it says Asus. Is that like a? I'm guessing
That's
it's
a tablet,
right?
Yeah, it's a tablet. Probably lighting control. Look behind him. That's lighting control, I bet.
Probably.
Yeah, it looks like they got some cool lighting. Yeah.
Super clean desk. Great little setup. You can tell. Like, look, the mouse isn't even flat. He's got the mouse in the charging position. Because who needs a mouse when you have literally all the control surfaces that you need?
Right.
Yeah, right.
This is a really beautiful setup, man. This is clean. It's simple. I bet it sounds great. I love having the twin right here. Like, be able to like plug in a guitar, plug in headphones. I'm having trouble finding a fault. I mean, it's a little zoomed in, so who knows what the acoustic treatment's like in the room.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
But I'm it's a nice big TV monitor. Hard to tell. It's not small. So you got plenty of screen real estate. Yeah, that's a really dope studio, J Craft. So I'll go first. I'm gonna give it a 7. I think that's a super strong. You know what? I'm gonna give it an 8 because of the LED colors. I'm a man after my own heart. How about you, Drew? What would you give this one?
My only issue is like the 5s are too, like the monitor placement. I think this is something I see. I'm gonna give it a 7 because I think like that we don't have the right sort of monitoring equilateral triangle going on there. I think those are so far apart. You know what I mean? I think we've sacrificed monitoring for that big TV in the middle. So I'll just give it a 7. So.
Fair enough.
Gotta find something wrong. I gotta find something.
Exactly. Like, it can't all be love. We gotta give some tough love too. Matt, what would you give this one?
I think I'm gonna go 7 too. Yeah, seems like a great mixing room, but needs some instruments, needs some keyboards or drum pads or something going on. That's just my personal opinion, but I'll give it a 7.
Fair enough. All right, and chat, everybody in the chat, I need scores from you guys. We're starting to come in. Great, good timing, guys. We got a 7, a 6.5. Drew was literally reading my mind. Wow, you guys, Drew, you in the chat, man. You guys are on the same page here.
I know our people, Ben. I know our people.
You do.
Yeah.
Let's wait for a few more scores to come in. An 8. Okay, we're still hovering around that 7 area. 7. Yep. Minus 24.5. That doesn't count. A 9 from Peter. 7, 8, a 4. Tom, man, harsh. 7.5. I'm gonna give it 7.5. All right. To my eyes, it looks like chat. You guys are centering a 6. Yeah, we're centering around a 7 for you guys.
Yeah.
It sounds about right.
That sounds about right. 6, 7. Yeah. Oh, 1,000. Yes. Let me that really skews the average.
Yeah, right.
Congratulations. All right. So now moving on to our second room. Jeremy Daniels mix. His view every day. This one's dope. This is a great looking room. So like I said, this is a slightly more analog setup. But let's take a little zoom in tour. We got the UF8 again. It just seems like we see that controller everywhere, and it's probably because it's actually really good. We got Amphions, we got Atoms, we got a dual monitor setup, a low and a high. It looks like.
Yeah.
The Grace monitor controller with the TC meter. Beautiful window view. I'm a huge fan of natural light. If you guys couldn't tell from right behind the blaring light behind me, you can tell the single Oratone style.
Yeah. Single Oratone.
Yep.
And DW Fern.
That's a beautiful piece. Yeah. 2 Apollos. Looks like a Burkasti is in there. I see a Chandler in there.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the
Alicia
SSL
something or other.
The Alicia compressor, the SSL Fusion, the Dangerous compressor.
Good gear.
That's a super dope setup here. We got acoustic treatment on the walls. Nothing in. It looks like there's a bass trap here, probably behind the desk.
Yeah.
But so you can tell this is
a nice balance. It's a nice balance of the natural light. They got some heavy curtains going there, some acoustic treatments. It's probably.
What do you think about the speaker placement on this one, Drew?
Yeah, the atoms are the atoms. I feel like this looks like it's the lens that this is used. I think that if you're in the mix position, sitting up straight, it's probably pretty good. I think that's and yeah. So I think it's okay. Might be borderline, but yeah, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, super comfortable.
Nice chair too.
Yeah, the Phantom chair. You can see he's launching, just about to launch
Luna.
Launching Luna.
Yeah, nice.
So taking moments before, he had an excellent sounding mix. All right, so chat, let me know. Oh, someone's saying it's the Elysia EQ, not the compressor. They might be right. Yeah.
They all look the same. Who knows?
Exactly. All right. Drew, what would you give this one?
I'm gonna go 9. I'm gonna go 9 on that. I mean, like borderline 10. I mean, almost. I'm almost giving it a 10, but I'll just hold that back because I don't know what we're gonna get next week. So you gotta hold back the 10.
Exactly. How about you, Matt?
I'm gonna go 8. Again, 8? No instruments, but yeah, this one's pretty sweet room.
Yeah, it is. I totally agree. Like, I'm torn, and the reason why I put these two up against each other, I knew this one was gonna have a big advantage with all the analog gear, whereas this one had the advantage with all the controllers, which fair play. Yeah. But I'm gonna go with Drew on this one, man. Like this is a 9. Like if I had to pick where do I want to spend my days, like I'm spending it looking out the window, getting some sunlight, listening to incredible speakers, really cool gear.
Yeah.
All right, so chat. As long as you guys give this a 4 or higher, I think we know today's winner. We've got an 8.9, a 9, 7, an 8, an 8.5, an 8, 8, 7.5, 6.5. Yeah, lots of 8s. You guys 9, 9, 9, 9, 7. I think chat's kind of centering around about an 8.
I think so, yeah.
So with an 8, we got a 34.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
congrats.
Clear winner here. Jeremy Daniels, congratulations. You won today's Studio Showdown. Beautiful spot. Hit us up live at U Audio social at U Audio, and Dan will get in touch with you, and we will make sure we get you your prize, your UA Live mug. So guys, nice. That's another office hours in the books. We've only got a couple more shows for the season. We're heading into the holidays. Obviously, we got Thanksgiving this week, but we're back next week. And yes, guys, I saw lots of comments asking about drum mixing. It's on the list. But next week we're going from low end this week to next week we're bringing it up. We're gonna go all vocals. It's an entire vocal mixing show next Monday. So we're gonna talk about not just fixing, but also like exciting, adding effects, all sorts of cool tricks and techniques that you guys can use on your mixes around vocals. So definitely, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of these episodes. And in the meantime, if you have questions, if you need help, you can always reach out. Support's always here to help you guys, but there's also great resources over on Facebook. There's the UAD users group, and then there's the UAD forum, a forum dedicated to everything about UA and UAD. And you guys you'll find help from Drew over there, as well as Instagram, Twitter, everywhere you can expect to find us. But if you guys have got music that you've been making that you'd like us to feature in the countdowns, make sure you hit us up live at uaudio.com. Hashtag UA Office Hours to enter the Studio Showdown. And I think with that, guys, everybody, I hope you guys got a lot of value, got a lot of cool ideas out of today's show. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of different things. So put it to use. Hit us up. Let us know what worked good for you guys. We love getting the feedback from you guys and seeing what's working on your mixes. Don't miss out on the 12 days of UAD. And if you're in America, have a fantastic Thanksgiving, and we'll be back with you guys next Monday. Catch y'all later.
See you guys.
Peace.
See you guys.
What?
I gotta go.
Come on, this is the only room with the verb.
But I gotta go.
Thoughts knock around in my